Hi everyone, I hope everybody's hanging in there okay. So this week I'm going to tell you all about an object that is known as the Pisa Griffin. So here it is. And before I start talking about the actual object, I'm just going to show you all this map of Pisa, where the object is still located. And I'll talk specifically about where exactly it is in a few moments. So, as we know, Pisa was a major maritime power during the medieval period until about the end of the 13th century. And as we can see, it is very close to Livorno, another major port city that we've been discussing, obviously, last week. So, the Griffin is a bronze sculpture from Al-Andalus, or Islamic Spain, and scholars have dated it to about the 11th century. It's the largest example of medieval Islamic metalwork known to this day, and it stands at a little over 3 feet tall and it's about 2 feet long, so pretty large. The griffin has a head of an eagle and a body of a lion, but also ears that are somewhat like a horse, and these wattles here, this like droopy bit around its neck, like those of a rooster. It also is engraved with different designs, and there is a Kufic inscription that translates to, quote, perfect benediction, complete well-being, perfect joy, eternal peace and perfect health, and happiness and good fortune for the owner. And that is engraved across its chest and sides. So here's the detail of that inscription. It's unclear how and when exactly the sculpture was brought to Pisa, but most scholars agree that it was most likely taken as war booty during Pisa's crusade against Majorca in the 12th century. So here's a map of the Balearic Islands off the coast of Spain, where the Republic of Pisa led this crusade in 1113. And so this largest island, highlighted in green, is Majorca. So the griffin, which was said to be taken during this crusade, was placed on the top of a column on the roof of the Pisa Cathedral until about the mid-19th century, when it was moved into the Cathedral Museum. So it's possible that the griffin was actually made as a sort of musical instrument, because we've discovered that when wind blows through its body and through its mouth, it emits these howling sounds. And here is the western facade of the cathedral on the left, and a photo of an aerial view of the eastern side and the roof of the apse where the griffin was placed. And so today there's a copy that still is in the place of the original on this column on the roof. And here's just a closer look. So the griffin comes from a tradition of bronze metalwork in which animals and other mythological creatures were depicted and used as aqua maniles. I'm not sure I'm actually saying that right. And this is a type of vessel that was used for hand washing, as well as they could have been incense burners and sometimes fountainheads. These animals could have been carved into those kinds of objects as well. So here are two examples of these vessels, the aqua maniles. On the left is an Islamic example from Iran, and on the right is a German example of a lion that's now exhibited at the Met. So even though this bird is obviously smaller, you can still see the similarities between the two objects. So for the most part, the griffin was presented and still is presented as a local piece of Pisan culture. Its Islamic origins weren't illuminated until the second half of the 19th century. And from the 16th until 19th century, its origins were misidentified due to various chroniclers and scholars' inability to recognize and translate the Arabic inscription. So this is a point that Sean brings up in his article about sort of how objects were received very differently depending on the translation of these inscriptions. At the end of the 16th century, it was actually mistaken as Egyptian because the Kufic script was believed to be hieroglyphics. And it wasn't until 1829 that the inscription was first translated by Michelangelo Lanci, who was an Italian Orientalist. So, along with its Islamic origins, the Pisa Griffin does reflect certain Christian and local Pisan beliefs as well. The creature of the griffin has been associated with Christ due to its dual nature. So it is both a winged bird and an earthly lion, just as Christ is king of both the heavens and earth. The griffin also has roots in Greco-Roman mythology. A chronicler from the 18th century thought that the Pisa griffin was a copy of an Etruscan sculpture, and as one scholar argues, quote, "This interpretation reflects the political and cultural tendency in the 18th and 19th century to praise Pisa as the legitimate rival of Rome throughout history. The Pisa Griffin was thought to be, as were the Duomo's antique columns and capitals, a monument that represented the city's glorious past." So I'll show you again what these columns that it is placed on top of look like, what the architecture of the cathedral looks like. So I believe that the object fits in really well with what we've been reading this week in terms of how items were shared between Islamic and Christian communities and how they took on multiple meanings due to their shifting contexts. I chose it because it does appear to be kind of an uninnocuous object if you view it from afar, because it's placed on such a sort of difficult or far away location to be accessed, and you can't see it very well. And it's just kind of part of the cathedral and really blends in. But when you examine it on its own and take in all of the details, there is a lot to learn about it, and an entirely new history is literally written on it. And so obviously it has this different context now that it is sort of placed in a museum where people can look at it more closely and examine the Islamic origins. And that's a question I'm going to ask you all about in discussion. So thank you for listening, and I will move on to the discussion questions.